Welcome to Broken Silence. I'm Sanyya Gardez. Today we're talking about drug abuse and gang violence. Do we as Asians think we're immune, or are we simply brushing the issue under the rug? Joining me to discuss this a little further is councillor Salma Yaqoob. Thank you for joining us today, Salma.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with drug abuse and gang violence?
Well, as a councillor, I get approached all the time from people affected by it in different ways. I have residents who say we're fed up of seeing young people on the corners dealing, actually smoking the stuff. It's affecting kids, our own kids, in that way, the bad influence. I get people who have been vandalised, whose homes have been broken into because people are trying to rob them for money, for gold, in order to sell on, to fund a drug addiction. Also, I get concerned parents who say we don't know where to turn to. We worry that maybe our son or daughter has a problem, but we just don't know who to trust, because we're also worried what the neighbours will say, what the relatives will say, and often they end up hiding the problem. So I get it from a number of different perspectives from that point of view.
Salma, do you think that the issue of izzat and you know, what will people say when they find out, does that prevent a lot of families and a lot of youths that are involved in drug abuse coming forward?
A huge amount. Perhaps not the young people themselves, because often when they're in that problem, that's
they don't really care about the
they don't really care.
Yeah.
You know, if they had a notion of izzat, they probably wouldn't be doing it in the first place. But definitely the parents, and often what you might see, which perhaps some people might not have expected when you first think about this, is actually how some parents even cover up. I mean, the fact that some people don't even ask their kids, where are you getting the money from to buy that BMW or that Mercedes, when they know they haven't got jobs which would provide that kind of money. So there's almost a silent collusion for some people, not saying with everybody, that kind of goes on, which almost makes it acceptable, as in turning that blind eye and not admitting that there's something very bad going on and how it impacts not just on their own family but on the surrounding people.
Well, once a parent realizes or thinks that there might be an issue with their child, you know, dabbling in drugs or getting involved with the wrong crowd, what's the step that they should take?
Well, ideally, it's about trying to nip it in the bud. So if you're worried that your children are hanging around people who may be involved in this, or perhaps are already showing signs of, you know, being withdrawn, not communicating in the way that they did, you're worried in that sense. Ideally, you should be able to turn to people who you trust. And I'm really pleased that in my ward, we've actually got the first culturally sensitive drug service to actually help people, and we actually have an outreach service where we have women going to mums in their houses, because often people don't like to come to a clinic or somewhere official to discuss this. Often it's just even admitting there is a problem, so we're trying to make it as easy as possible. So there's prevention as well. We're going to schools to talk about, you know, how people can avoid this and to say no. But once a problem started, we do need services which address it and help people through it so that they can actually overcome the problem.
Now, you said that your board has councillors or advisors that are culturally sensitive to the Asian community. Now, when a mother does come in to discuss this, or you go to their house and talk about drug abuse and gang violence, do you think at that point it's already too late? Once somebody's already involved with gangs or drugs, is it already too late?
We can never say it's too late. I think we always have a responsibility to do what we can. And often it's not just about the usual do-gooders going in, because they'll get ignored. And so in the service, for example, that we've set up in the ward, we've got ex-users. They'll have more credibility.
Sure.
They've been through the problem. They know what made them do it in the first place. They know what's helped them to get out of it. And having that kind of credibility, I think, is important when you're dealing with something.
That's actually a very good point, because I was going to ask that, you know, having an auntie or an uncle, your mom and dad sit you down and say, oh, you know, drugs are bad, you're going to think, well, what do you know about drugs, you know? And having a person who's used it speak to you, sit you down and say, look, this is where it can go wrong, I guess actually makes the difference.
And actually what's also important to remember is, although drugs are a problem in their own selves, often they're the solution that some of these young people have turned to in their minds for a different problem. You know, it's often like it is with the alcohol. For some people, it's a problem in its own right, but often they're trying to mask other issues, whether it's insecurity, whether it's a need to belong because they don't feel they have that place, maybe they don't feel understood in their families, or they're having problems in school. And we can't get away from the fact we have such high unemployment in some of our inner city areas that people are looking for that shortcut. They haven't got gainful employment, something positive and constructive to use their time. They're seeing these other people with the whole bling bling culture. They're saying, we want some of that, we want it fast. They haven't got the ethos of our parents, you've got to work hard, save, it's the slow and steady way that you actually achieve something. So this culture of we want everything now, a quick fix, but actually creating more problems.
We're going to get to what role media plays in drug abuse and gang culture. I mean, I know that now when you speak to the younger people, what do they want when they grow up? A nice car, diamonds, flashy jewelry, a big house, and I think the easiest way they think to get it is to get into drugs and to become part of a gang. Do you find that it's a lack of education that is pushing young people into drugs?
I don't think it's as simple as lack of education. I think you cannot underestimate the huge cultural pressure, not just talking about Asian culture, I'm talking about the wider culture some of our young people are faced with. So when you switch on MTV and you see all those, pop videos which do glamorize a certain kind of lifestyle, and also make it seem as if it's achievable, and really that can happen to anybody. I think some of the big problem here is a shortcut mentality, and it's kind of almost glorifying this kind of you want to be bad, and it's really uncool to just do the right thing, and I think we have to really tackle that head on. And I think that's why having a faith perspective, whether you're Christian, Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, is important, because it gives you a grounding that there's something bigger, a link to a spiritual value, where your self-esteem is not about what other people think of you and can put you down. Because often, as I said, it's about being insecure. I actually worked as a psychotherapist, and part of my job was actually in a drug and alcohol unit. And it made me so sad to see people who would be viewed as criminals, by the outside world, how often they had so many problems, and this was their way of escaping their problems. So we have to get to the root of the problem as well.
Well, I mean, obviously drugs and alcohol are a form of escapism. Now, in our research, we spoke to people that were dealing drugs and pushing drugs, and a lot of them are really religious in their respective religions. So they will, perhaps deal Monday through Friday, and then Friday go to their prayers, and for that day they think that because they've prayed they're absolved of all their sins, and kind of use it as a counterbalance of what they're doing.
Well, that's just terrible. I mean, there's only one word for that, and that's hypocrisy.
Do you think though, if somebody was, say, practicing Muslim and they're part of their mosque community, and then fell into something like drugs or fell into something like gangs, how comfortable do you think they would be going to somebody in the mosque and saying, look, I'm dealing with this?
I think there are still huge communication gaps. We have that generation gap that's always been there to some extent, and I think that's why, although it'd be great to say that our mosques could be these centres of excellence that can deal with every single problem, they should definitely have a guide role, and there should be a place of welcome at times of difficulty. But I don't think it's right to put all the onus just on the faith communities. Like, we have a wider responsibility, and we need that specialist kind of approach as well, which is why I think having culturally and faith-sensitive services as part of mainstream services is the way forward in this as well.
And a final note, in your personal experience, your opinion actually, do you think that this problem is getting exacerbated, is becoming bigger, or do you think we're getting a handle on it?
Well, in some ways I think we're making really good strides. For example, in my ward, the drug problem is not as bad as it has been, and that's great news to know that actually these things can be tackled. But we can't also escape, there's a wider issue, apart from the role models and lack of, actually the international situation is impacting directly on our streets here, because 90% of the heroin coming to Britain comes from Afghanistan, and the fact that it's destabilised in this so-called war on terror is impacting directly with that influx. So we could try and fight up to a point here, but it becomes a losing battle when you have the international situation as it is, and I think Britain has a role actually in stemming that as well, and its role in actually destabilising Afghanistan.